Okay, welcome everybody. So I'm Steve Pollaine. I have a doctorate in physics, and I spent 31 years at Lawrence Livermore Lab as a physicist doing research in fusion energy research. I've also been a member of Hamid Ali's Diamond Heart School for 27 years. So I have a background in both physics and also in spiritual work. And so it gives me a certain unique view that I'd like to share with you today. So I'm going to talk about, let's see, can people see that? Is it possible to darken the room a little bit on this side?
Yes, can you darken the room?
And what I'd like to say is that looks like I have to focus a little differently from the top versus the bottom. Okay, can people see now? So I'm going to talk about three views of consciousness: the materialist view, the quantum view, and a non-physical view. I'm going to talk about subjective evidence to try to distinguish between these three views, like reincarnation and so on, and then implications for reality. So there's three main views of consciousness. There's the materialist view, which is that consciousness naturally arises from some complex system like our brain. And it's the predominant view among scientists and doctors. And you don't hear very much about this at this conference, although there was a poster session where the guy ascribed to this. There's the quantum view, where consciousness is a fundamental property of physics. And this view you've heard a lot here at this conference. For example, John Hagelin, I took his workshop on Thursday and also listened to his Friday morning talk. And he talks all about how consciousness is related to physics. Henry Stapp also, in his book, had that viewpoint. And Russell Targ, he didn't really address this in his talk today, but in his book, he also mentions that. And Stuart Hameroff, who's given a lot of workshops here in the past, also has this point of view. Then there's the non-physical view, where consciousness is more fundamental than the physical world that physics describes. Consciousness can exist without a brain in this view. And Hamid Ali and Adyashanti, in their conversation on Friday, both have that point of view. And this morning, Donald Hoffman and also Peter Russell had that point of view. So here's a summary of the three views of consciousness. The materialist view, where consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the material world. The quantum view, where consciousness is equal to the physical world and maybe arises out of some fundamental physics. The non-physical view, where the material world is an epiphenomenon of consciousness. So I'd like to ask you, which one of you believes that's most likely, given that reality is a democracy? How many people here believe in a materialist view? Okay, one guy. How many people here believe in the quantum view? Okay, quite a few hands. And how many people believe in the non-physical view? Looks like most people.
What's the quantum view again? Can you repeat it?
Yes, the quantum view is that consciousness is a fundamental property of physics. And I'm going to go into all this in much more detail, so you'll see it. So I hope to show that the evidence supports the non-physical view, and that's what I'm going to be promoting here today. So I'm going to just go through these views briefly. The materialist point of view is that consciousness arises from the complexity of the brain, and it implies that it'll arise in any sufficiently complex system like a computer. Many movies and science fiction novels take this stand. The first one I'm aware of is 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the computer HAL attains sentience and says, "I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that." One that came out this year is called Her. A man and his operating system fall in love with each other. You know, a really beefed up model of Siri. Now, if this is true, then it turns out that you and I standing here, maybe we are just simulations in some giant supercomputer somewhere. And that's the theme of the Matrix movies. You know, maybe you take the blue or red pill and you wake up to this greater reality. And this view is also called Scientism or scientific materialism. And it is the predominant view in Western culture. And only physical reality exists. Consciousness comes out of some interaction of the neurons of our brain. It ceases at a time of physical death. And near-death experiences are just hallucinations, and so are out-of-body experiences. ESP and psychokinesis, in this view, cannot exist. Mediums are basically fraudulent, and all religions are misguided, and indigenous tribal cultures are ignorant and superstitious. And this view has been used to justify a lot of what we've done over the last 5 centuries or so. So now I'll talk more about the quantum point of view. Consciousness arises from some aspect of quantum mechanics or modern physics, and you've heard a lot of that at this conference. So this is a picture of Russell Targ, a quote from him. David Bohm considers physics to be comprehensive enough to embrace consciousness, and I strongly agree. So in some sense, if we can understand physics enough, we can see how consciousness arises from that. And this was first promoted by Fritjof Capra. Now he actually, if you read his book, he actually says it's a metaphor and not the real thing. But people tend to gloss over and try to make it the real thing. And the movie, What the Bleep Do We Know, actually leaves you with an impression that they are the same, that physics and consciousness are coming from the same place. And there's lots of mysterious things in physics, and people like to say, well, if we don't understand this, maybe, and we don't understand consciousness, they must be the same thing. So using that logic, Laszlo, in his book, Science in the Akashic Field, says, well, maybe it's the zero-point energy. And Fred Allen Wolf, in 2008, I was at this conference, and he said, well, maybe it's tachyons, or faster than light matter. And there was a poster session. I didn't see the poster, but it was written up in a book, so I thought I'd throw it in there, where also she says it's superluminal matter because it goes faster than, if something moves so fast, maybe it's as fast as thought. And of course, other people, I'm sorry, let's see, can we raise this a little bit? We're cutting off. Cutting off the bottom. Anyway, some people have related consciousness to dark matter, dark energy, or the extra dimensions of string theory. And it's been promoted here at the SAN conferences. I'd say the most sophisticated model of this is one devised by Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. And basically, consciousness arises when a quantum mechanical wave function collapses inside the microtubules of neurons. And they've actually made this a very quantitative. And the idea is that the collapse happens because of quantum gravity. And Roger Penrose, being a superb physicist that he is, one of the best in the world, actually he came up with a quantitative theory that is quite persuasive. Of course, Henry Stapp, also in his book, he didn't talk about it yesterday, but in his book, he kind of comes up with this point of view also, that it's related to the reduction of the wave function, when you make a measurement. And of course, John Hagelin gave a talk. I was at his workshop on Thursday, and I listened to his talk on Friday. And he says that consciousness is the unified field that underlines string theory or M theory. So here he's equating consciousness with physics, basically. He says they come from the same thing. And Dean Radin didn't quite say that, but he did attribute ESP to quantum entanglement. That maybe the fact that I know when my brother died, even though I wasn't there, there was some signal, this signal that came across, and maybe that's because I'm entangled with him. Does this answer your question about the quantum view? Okay. So now the non-physical view, consciousness is more fundamental than the physical world, which of course includes quantum mechanics. So then consciousness does not need a brain to exist. Our consciousness existed before birth and after death. There is a reality that's not physical, and that's where we go, where our souls go when we die. And I hope to show that the evidence supports this view. And there have been lots of movies that have this point of view, some delightful movies with Robin Williams, What Dreams May Come, and Warren Beatty, Heaven Can Wait. They're very fun to watch. So which one is it? Which of these three views? Well, there's two possibilities for the relationship between a brain and consciousness. It could be like an iPod that generates consciousness, or it could be like a radio, which is a receiver of consciousness. Of course, if it's the materialist view, and the quantum view, it's more like an iPod. But if it's a non-physical view, then it's much more like a radio, and we're just receiving consciousness, but it's not being generated by the brain. So what's the evidence for each one? Well, the scientists will go to dissect the brain and study all the interconnection of all the nerves, and they'll say that, yeah, there's lots of correlations between brain states and consciousness, but you'd expect these correlations to exist, whether the brain is a generator or a receiver. So no matter how much you study the brain, you're not going to distinguish between these views. So I think we have to look at subjective evidence. What does consciousness itself tell us? And the subjective evidence I'm going to look at are reincarnation and out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, the experience of mediums who speak with spirits, ghost hunters who've talked with ghosts, shamanic practitioners, and the perceptions of mediators and enlightened masters. And when I go through each of these, I'm going to rate these three views, the material, quantum, and non-physical. Can they support this kind of phenomenon, yay or nay? So let me talk about reincarnation. And Jim Tucker here has an incredible book about lots of cases of reincarnation. I want to just read to you one particular case of this woman named Shanti Devi. She was born in 1926 in India, and as soon as she could talk, she started talking about this previous lifetime. And she drove her parents crazy, saying, I'd like to go back and visit the people I was with, see my husband again. And finally, she told her teacher, and the teacher asked for the name of the husband, and he contacted him and found out, yeah, this guy exists. And this became widely known, and Mahatma Gandhi got involved, and he invited her to live at the ashram, and he talked with her, and he established a commission of 15 people, scientists, politicians, and all sorts of things, and they took her to the house, and she readily identified everybody. She knew all sorts of things, like there was 175 rupees buried under the floor right there. She knew about everybody's extramarital affairs. And most of all, in her previous lifetime, she had a bad case of arthritis. So much so that it was difficult for her to have sex. But she managed to have a certain way of accommodating that. And so her husband asked about that, and she described how she accommodated her arthritis to have sex. And her husband was absolutely convinced. There's nobody in the world who possibly knew such intimate details. And other skeptics have gone and talked to her, and they came away convinced, like, this is the only proven case of reincarnation. So how do you explain this? Well, you can't explain it with a materialist point of view at all. With a quantum point of view, maybe you could. Maybe the information gets imprinted somehow on the structure of space-time or something, and somehow gets into this newborn baby, and she picks it up. And it certainly can be accommodated more naturally by the non-physical point of view. out-of-body and near-death experiences also, I think, provide some interesting evidence about this. There's a case there in which there was a woman who, well, let's see, let me just get my notes here. There's this migrant worker who had a heart attack, and she was in the hospital, and she almost died. And she had this out-of-body experience that she talked about when she was later revived. And she went outside and saw a shoe on the third floor ledge of the hospital outside, and there was a lace underneath the heel. And she described details of this shoe. And you could not see it from the window. But this guy did investigate, and he did see such a shoe there, and it was exactly what she described. So there is evidence, and this does happen. And there's another interesting book, Near-Death Experiences by Eben Alexander. And it's also a very interesting thing. It's called Proof of Heaven, and it's about his own near-death experience, where he almost dies. And, well, he was brain dead for a full week, and he's a neurosurgeon. And he describes this place of heaven where it was very beautiful, and he was led around by this beautiful woman. And when he awoke, he thought, wow, that's amazing. And it changed his view forever of how things were. And he realized that he was also an adopted baby. And years after this experience, he finally made contact with his adopted family, his birth family, his genetic family. And he learned that he had a sister who had died a long time ago. And when he looked at the picture of that sister, that was the person who was accompanying him in that heaven. So I would say that even the quantum view can't accommodate this. When you have non-physical souls that's not supported by a body, then I would say things are clearly non-physical. And we're cut off here a little bit to the right. There you go. Mediums often have a lot of knowledge, and they seem to really sometimes contact the dead. This is a picture of Hollis Durand, and I knew about her because I was at this conference at Forever Family Foundation, and I saw her perform in front of the audience. My mother died in 2009, and so my sister and I visited her. And when she saw me and talked to me, she knew some intimate details about my life that really surprised the hell out of me. And I was wondering how she could know about that. Another interesting medium, Robert Brown, We Are Eternal. And here's his book right here. And you're welcome to come up and look at these books later. I'll give you one little story, which is this guy named Bill in Florida had a son who died a sudden death, a homicide, back in 1997. And he went to see Robert Brown. And Robert Brown was able to confirm a lot of the details of how he died, and also other personal details. His son was working on a collage, and he could identify the people in the collage. And the son also, through Robert Brown, said that something significant would happen on October 18th, which at that time was 5 months away. And sure enough, come 5 months later, on that very day, they settled some litigation against the apartment that his son was living in. So if you talk about access to information, well, you can accommodate that with a quantum point of view, although not the materialist point of view. But if you talk about communication with live spirits, and you talk to them and they talk to you back, I think only the non-physical point of view can support that. Now, there's many reliable sightings of ghosts, and communications with them show who they are when they are alive. This guy to the right is Lloyd Auerbach, and I had the pleasure of taking some classes from him back in Lafayette some years ago. He told a very interesting ghost story. He's a professional ghost hunter, And he was called upon to investigate a ghost in Livermore. So he's driving down, and a car's giving him trouble, and he's telling the people who was with him, I think I need to get a new car. They get to the house in Livermore, and the parents can't talk to the ghost, but their teenage son can. And turns out the ghost has been helping him with his homework and telling him how to date girls and things like that. And the ghost asked Lloyd Auerbach, through the boy, I know you're going to be getting a new car. And Lloyd said, well, how did he know about that? And it turns out that this ghost was afraid that he would be bringing in the type of equipment that you have in Ghostbusters, that 1984 movie, where he would capture the ghost. And so the ghost had to check him out first and overheard him talking about getting a new car. And sure enough, the ghost was this woman who used to live in the house, and she got sick and went to the hospital and died, but came back. And she had a brother who's still living, so Lloyd interviewed the brother, and sure enough, all the details checked out. There are many places with repeated sightings of ghosts. The U.S. Hornet in Alameda, the Moss Beach Distillery, haunted by the Blue Lady. So if you just have a ghost sighting, well, maybe that can be explained by the quantum point of view, because maybe some of the information is imprinted in the material objects around. But if you have communication where you ask a question and you get answers, well, I think that's only supported by the non-material point of view, the non-physical point of view. Another line of evidence I want to talk about is shamanism. And this is a picture of Michael Harner, who's he's been a pioneer in introducing shamanism to the West. And I personally have taken many workshops from him. And he has this incredible book, Cave and Cosmos, where he describes a lot of these shamanic journeys. And I'll just share one with you so you get a flavor of it. This is a person with asthma, and she wanted to take a shamanic journey for the purpose of healing her asthma. So she says, "Eagle took me up through the clouds, and then I continued myself up to a bright star. I went through the star and came to a land of bright lights and shimmering landscapes. I asked for a teacher to appear, and out came Merlin. He took me into a crystal cave, sat me down, opened up a box, and took out a very hot quartz crystal. He said, 'This is what was taken from you so many years ago. The heat of your passion, the light of your power. It is time to return it. The hot crystal will melt the icicles of fear and grief of loss that you hold in your chest.' He placed the hot quartz crystal on her chest, and she felt the heat and felt her chest clear. And she was flooded with memories of her love for that man. And after the journey, she found that her asthma was gone, and over the next few weeks and months, the asthma did come back a bit, but it was much less severe than it used to be. So again, when you're addressing spirits, I think it's the non-physical, which is the only model that can support this kind of phenomena. Now, enlightened masters agree on many features of consciousness and a greater reality. There's Hamida Lead and Nadia Shanti, who had this incredible talk, a conversation back on Friday. Thich Nhat Hanh has written a lot about Tibetan Buddhism, and Yogananda has a community of adepts devotees up in Grass Valley. They all agree on, they teach very different things, but they all agree that the ego self is an illusion, and our awareness, our consciousness survives physical death. And our awareness is ultimately non-dual, not separate, but part of the cosmic whole. So here, non-dual in the sense of being part of something greater. There's a oneness. And our consciousness has lots of properties like compassion and joy. And again, these people, if you talk to them, they will say, well, they believe in the non-physical point of view. And Hamida's, talk to me about that. Wrong button. Okay, so here's a summary of all the different lines of evidence. And this is why I claim that I think the subjective evidence strongly supports the non-physical point of view. And it explains lots of other phenomena that the other views can't. Let me tell you this other story. This is about from the journal of journalist William Byrd, who was fighting in World War I. He said, I was sleeping in a trench in France during World War I in 1917. I was woken up by someone shaking my shoulder, and I recognized my brother Steve, who had been missing in action 2 years before. Steve told me to get my gear and follow him, and I did. And as we rounded a corner, he vanished. I looked for him, but I couldn't find him anymore. I just gave up and went to sleep in that other place. And then when he woke up the next morning, he found that where he had been, a shell had landed and killed everybody who was there. And so if his brother hadn't intervened, he would have been killed by that shell. So, how do you explain that? I think the non-physical point of view does a good job of that. And there's lots of other things, like 2/3 of doctors and hospice workers have witnessed patients who've had transpersonal experience like deathbed visions. A lot of people have seen relatives who had just died. How many people here have had, communications with other, disembodied spirits or dead relatives who've visited and so on? Okay, yeah, it's a lot more common than people would like to think. In a safe place like this, and you ask this question, roughly half the audience had some kind of experience like that. And if we had more time, I'd invite you to share. So, if consciousness survives physical death, the implications are profound, and it shows the limits of science. The brain is the receiver, not a generator of consciousness. It can explain all these things: reincarnation, near-death experiences, mediums, ghosts, and so on. It's not based on physical reality at all. Can't be explained by neurons or quantum mechanics or entanglement or zero-point energy or a unified field or any of that stuff. Our consciousness is part of an infinitely greater non-physical reality. It's where we go after death, and it's been known since ancient times. The Australian Aborigines called it the dream time. The shamans call it the upper and lower worlds. The Tibetan Buddhists call it the bardos, and other people call it the astral realms. Science cannot address or explore these realms, although they can gather testimony, which is kind of what I've been doing. And we can access these realms for healing. And I should mention that shamanism is a part of almost every non-Western culture. And part of this is that conscious spirits exist, and we can talk with them. So we can explore our consciousness and reality through our own subjective experience. And a lot of you probably do these kind of things: meditation, breath work, prayer, fasting, service, taking special drugs, entheogens like ayahuasca, ibogaine, and so on. And a lot of tribal cultures take something like that: shamanism or guidance from a devotion to an enlightened master. So I invite you to explore the great mystery that is divine reality for yourselves. Our Earth is an insignificant speck in a vast universe. Within our cosmic horizon of 13 billion light years, there's maybe 10 to the 23 inhabited planets within our cosmic horizon. But in the infinitely larger non-physical reality, as conscious beings, we are all very special because we're part of the divine reality. So we can only explore these worlds through our own subjective experience. You won't find it through a microscope or telescope. You'll find it through your heart. So follow your heart. Thank you very much. So we have some time for questions or comments. Yeah?
Hi, I kind of off question, but since you're at Berkeley, since you're at Lawrence Lab. All right, so we have a lot of astronomers and astrophysicists, who like deadhead science, that's it. I work sometimes with the astronomy department at UC Berkeley, and in your experience at Lawrence Livermore, how many physicists do you know that really want to explore this realm more spiritually, but won't say it publicly because it would make them look like quacks?
There are quite a few who've dabbled in it. I met this one guy who did some experiments with the Ouija board, and he found some weird things he could not explain. And I kept asking, what do you think about that? And it was really challenging his materialist assumptions, and he could not let those go. He kept saying, well, I don't know, I'll figure out something. But he wasn't really willing to go with what it was taking him. And there's been a wide, most of them, I think, either don't think about it, or they'll subscribe to the materialist point of view. It is too bad.
Because they have the brains to really put it together.
No, they don't. It's not, you see, it's not that they don't have the brains. Of course they have the brains.
They don't have the heart.
Yes, that's it. It doesn't take brains, it takes heart. They don't have the heart. They haven't developed their heart. For me, you know, I had a very well-developed intellect, which I developed growing up, and I did well in school and so on. But I never learned to develop my heart, and it's only, you know, very painful to open up my heart and really feel that and begin to open up. And that's been my journey for, you know, most of my life, to try to learn to do that. And most physicists don't undertake that journey. It's very painful.
Thanks. I'd like some further clarification on the quantum, one of the three there, because to me, I could be wrong on this. The quantum field is a field of potentialities, and maybe even energy, and so you know. The physical field coming out of that and the consciousness coming out of that. Is that the way it's interpreted in the quantum branch?
Not following quite your question. Are you asking about the quantum?
Yeah, I want some further clarification on the quantum viewpoint.
Okay, that's a whole discussion. I think I'd rather go into that afterwards. It's a big thing. Yeah.
I have two very quick questions. One, wouldn't you suggest that Heisenberg at least, and Einstein as well, actually were of the third category? At least in some of the writing. Heisenberg and Einstein will be both of the third category.
I really don't know. I think, to tell you the truth, I don't know. I don't think so, but I can't be sure. Heisenberg possibly, Einstein maybe not, but I don't know for sure.
Can I just make a comment? Are you familiar with the dialogues between Einstein and Tagore? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me, yeah.
Thank you. Really, all the theories are valid from three different perspectives. The first, if you're looking at all that you can see from our senses using material substrates to test them. And you've brought some level of, a lot of clarity with this that I hadn't had until I looked at them together. The quantum field, in a way, is like a transformer that comes from the non-material and it comes through into the manifestation of the physical realm. And so some people using science and that perspective, openness to that perspective, can actually get more information than what we can just of matter. But really, it's not until we have the actual experience of the non-physical and the heart, it's really the heart, that we can make sense of all of those things that you showed us. So maybe you can comment on that.
Well, obviously you have to have the experience before you can start to understand it. I think when you use the word quantum to describe it, I would shy away from using that word. Yeah, I don't like that word. I like to keep quantum to the physical, to physics if we can. And then it doesn't apply to these kind of experiences.